Hello students, let us start our last session on the budget and economic survey. We have continued this series for almost 3 weeks, and in these 3 weeks we have done almost 8 to 9 videos, and we have covered almost all the major aspects related to the budget and the survey. And while explaining all of this, we have not just relied upon the current document provided by government, but also we have referred to some of the past surveys. We have covered additional information, additional terminologies from previous surveys. And in addition, regarding the budget session that I took, I have not only taken the current budget into reference, but I have also carefully myself calculated a lot of data and processed a lot of data to reflect the kind of trend that is going on. Okay, so that we have done, and in the previous session we started with the question answer discussion, and I wanted this question answer discussion to be interactive. Okay, so that is why I was giving you some time out to read the question, analyze the question, and I also suggested that you can also drop your answers into the comment box below, and I will check and I will comment on your answers there and then only. Meanwhile, since there is not much of the gap between these videos, so I have not yet seen much of the response there, but I believe in the due time there will be a lot more participation from the students, and same I am going to suggest you today as well, that you should participate more and more, and we are ready to run with you. You should also run for your preparation. So let us start with our session. We have covered 6 questions so far, and 6 more questions we are going to cover in today's session. So this is our next question, question number 7. This is specifically from the budget. The government's intention to keep fiscal deficit at 6.4% as announced in the Union Budget 2022 will lead to crowding off credit for the private investment and rise in the interest rate. Critically analyze. Before I analyze this question, discuss this question, I give you 30 seconds to carefully read and reflect and think in your mind what are the broader points, and then I will discuss with you. Please do so. Okay, so let us start. First of all, we are talking about the government wants to keep fiscal deficit at 6.4%. And we are arguing that this is a high deficit because we are suspecting that there may be a crowding out or a crowding of credit. So first of all, we have to talk about the trend of the fiscal deficit, that how much the fiscal deficit is going on, what it should be, and how much high is this fiscal deficit. Then definitely we need to explain the term crowding out. It's not so common a term that everybody is expected to know and understand these terms. So it is still, although it is fairly common, but it is still among the more complicated terms in the economics. So in fact, this is the term with which we start the answer in the introduction, and then we have to talk about that. This is basically the explanation of the crowding out, that because of rise in interest rate there will be crowding out of private investment. So we have to talk about, is this fiscal deficit 6.4% going to create a crowding out or not? That is what we have to analyze. So as I have told you in the introduction part, you have to talk about what is crowding out. Clear? So very briefly I will discuss here that what is crowding out. Well, crowding out is a situation, we first of all understand the general term, and it is also covered, by the way, in my second session on the survey and budget when I discuss the common terms for the budget and survey. You can also go and check out in that video, because there we have covered it in far more details. Here I will still be relatively brief, so I will suggest you to go back to that video and check that out. Nonetheless, crowding out, a term simply means that the place has got so saturated, that any place or anything becomes so saturated, so much crowded, so much full, that now stuff is falling out of it or people are going out of it. That is the general meaning of the term. Okay. What it means in economics is it is talking about the financial market, that if government has a very high fiscal deficit, then what will happen? In order to finance that fiscal deficit, government will borrow more and more, and if government will go to financial markets to borrow more and more, then it will create too much pressure on the resources in the financial system. It will create a saturation in the financial system, and this will create more and more demand in the financial market compared to the supply. And the supply is limited definitely. As a result, the interest rate will increase. We know the demand and supply theory. If demand increases and supply remains the same, then the prices increase. And in the financial market, interest rates are our prices basically. So what is the price we pay for the funds? It is the interest rate. So that is what matters in the financial market. So if interest rate increases, then a lot of people will not take loan. Their business may not be viable. Loan would be too expensive for them. So what is happening here ultimately, in one line now I have to summarize. If government runs a large fiscal deficit, then there are chances that this will create a saturation in the financial market, create a lot of excess demand in the financial market, and as a result, the financial market may respond by increasing the interest rates. And at higher interest rate, other people may not borrow. Many private sector players, they will go out of the market. They will be pushed out of the market. And this is what we call as crowding out. So crowding out decreases the investment. It is against the growth. So government borrows too much, it has negative impact on the growth of the country. So this is the broader idea. In the answer, you just have to keep it in 2-3 lines. You do not have to exceed. You do not have to go in that much explanations. You talk about what is crowding out. Then the next part you talk about what kind of situation leads to crowding out. So when I was talking about crowding out, I was saying that crowding out may happen because of the government deficit. It does not necessarily happens. So when it will not happen and when it will happen, that condition we have to talk about. So crowding out happens when already private sector was having a good demand in the financial market. For example, let us say government increases its demand for funds by 10%. Okay? Because government is increasing its demands for fund, doesn't necessarily means that demand should exceed the supply. If demand was already very less, then additional demand from government is not going to create much of the impact. So that is something we need to understand. There is something called as liquidity here. So liquidity basically is the availability of credit or money supply in the financial market. Availability of credit in the market. So if liquidity is good, if liquidity is in excess, if availability of credit is too much, then government borrowing will not create crowding out. That is something we need to understand. Let me explain it in a very simple colloquial sense. Market में total 100 resources हैं. Okay? Out of those 100 resources, private sector had demand of 30 resources. Government was having demand of 30 resources, let us say, and household. Okay, this is business, government, and this is household, people. They have demand for 20. Okay, this is our financial market. There is supply of 100, 100 की availability है, 20 की डिमांड हाउसहोल्ड कर रहे हैं, मतलब वो होम लोन ले रहे हैं, कार लोन ले रहे हैं, क्रेडिट कार्ड पे लोन ले रहे हैं. तो पब्लिक भी लोन्स की डिमांड क्रिएट करती है, बिजनेसेस लोन की डिमांड क्रिएट करते हैं जो कि इन्वेस्टमेंट जनरेट करता है. नई फैक्ट्री खोलने के लिए, नए कारखाने खोलने के लिए, नई कंपनियां खोलने के लिए बिजनेस भी लोन्स की डिमांड करते हैं और सरकारें भी लोन की डिमांड करती हैं बहुत तरह की ज़रूरत के लिए। इससे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बनाया जा सकता है, इससे नई फैक्ट्रियां भी सरकारी उपक्रम में खोली जा सकती हैं और इससे गवर्नमेंट मिलिट्री एक्सपेंडिचर भी कर सकते हैं. सो दैट्स ऑल डिपेंडिंग अपॉन द government usage. So in such a situation, even if government increases its demand from 30 to 40, it is not going to create much of the impact because demand was still 80 compared to the supply. But if the situation was this, that business was having demand of 50, in that situation, if government increases the demand by 10 additional units, government has more borrowing requirement, then demand will exceed supply significantly, and as a result, interest rate will rise. When interest rate will rise, these two will go out of market slightly. So this is crowding out. So crowding out happens depending upon the liquidity conditions, and liquidity conditions depend upon the health of the economy. So now we need to understand, in a slowdown situation, when economy is not doing well, when people do not have much of confidence, when there is uncertainty, demand is less. In such a situation, if government creates a larger fiscal deficit, then crowding out does not happen. Rather, a crowding in situation happens. In this question, crowding in is out of scope. Again, I will tell you that if you want to see what is crowding in, please go and check out the video on common terms in the same series on the budget and the survey. Nonetheless, let's get back to the point. So we have understood what kind of situation leads to crowding out when there is limited liquidity in the market, or when we do not have excess liquidity in the market. Now let us move ahead from here. So this will be roughly 1/3 of your answer, or almost 40% of your answer. Then you need to talk about why it will create crowding out and why it is not going to create crowding out. So we will talk about both the situation, that at present what kind of situation is there. So is India close to a situation that crowding out may happen? This is what we are going to argue. क्या भारत अभी उस स्थिति में है जहां क्राउडिंग आउट होने वाला है? सो रीजंस इन फेवर, हमें क्यों लगता है, व्हाई डू वी थिंक दैट देयर कैन बी क्राउडिंग आउट? सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, there is revival of business and there is demand in the economy. So we have already seen in the previous sessions on the survey that Indian economy is having a boom now. It had a sharp V-shaped recovery, and now we are above the pre-COVID levels, and even after that we are having a bumper growth. We are having a decent growth. Perhaps it is possible that in next 2-3 years, if a good growth continue, perhaps even the loss of 2 years that we had because of COVID situation, we may even compensate for that. So that is the kind of situation we are having. When there is a revival of business, when people are more and more confident, when their stock market value are skyrocketing, and businesses in general are doing well, that we have also seen through PMI index. So obviously there is more demand for investment, and investment is increasing. Then growth rate, I've already discussed that part in fact along with that. So because of this reason, we think if government will continue to have very large deficit, this will be detrimental for the businesses because they are creating demand for liquidity. And then what are the reasons against? Why do we think that crowding out may not happen? So the biggest reason is there is still excess liquidity in the economy. Still there is no such situation that increased demand for investment is exceeding the supply. Let us look at the liquidity condition here. If this line is below zero, you can see here, if this blue line is below zero, this shows excess liquidity. And we can see here that consistently since the mid of 2019, there has been excess liquidity condition. And even today in the January 2022, it is coming up from the bottom that it had, but still it is very much negative. That means we still do have lot of excess liquidity in the system. So because of excess liquidity, crowding out is not likely to happen. Clear? How do you write in examination? मैंने तो आपको ग्राफ दिखा दिया. एग्जाम में कैसे लिखेंगे? एग्जाम में सिंपली लिखिए that there has been an excess liquidity condition since the mid of 2019. Indian economy was already slowing down in 2019. It was a bad year for us, and since then, because of COVID and other conditions, the liquidity availability has been in fact rising, and we are not yet into a situation where there is balance in the liquidity, and as a result the interest rate increase is not likely to happen immediately unless RBI changes the policy. Clear? Then we must also talk about the trends in the fiscal deficit, and with that we will end the answer. That the government extra spending or the fiscal deficits of government has helped Indian economy to recover in fact, and that is something that we should not in fact worry about. We should be worrying about other factors but not deficit as of now because of excess availability of credit, and secondly we are decreasing our fiscal deficit from last 2 years. 2020-21 we had a very high fiscal deficit. From there we came down last year, and from last year level of 6.9 now we are expecting to come down further. So we are in fact targeting a level of 4.5% of fiscal deficit by 2024-25. So that is something that we have targeted, and we expect that after this year our debt to GDP ratio will also start to fall. So we are in a recovery trend and our debt is also falling. So by the time this excess liquidity gap will cover up, as you can see here, this will go up to zero here, up to this line. Sorry, by that time, just a minute, yeah. By that time, we already will be in a position to cut our deficit. So that you need to talk about towards the end. Okay. So that's all that we have to talk about. In conclusion, you can talk about that will there be crowding out? Is situation 21-22 comparable to 22-23? That is where you must cover up. Okay, I've already discussed this when I was talking about this answer. And yes, one more point regarding what is our target for the fiscal deficit. For now, we have kept a temporary target of 4.5% for 2025. But in general, the target we have for Indian economy is 3%. And with that, we have covered the question number 1 today, or question number 7 overall. Let us look at the next question now. A virtuous cycle can happen only with the government leading the way. The idea of public investment-led strategy, led growth strategy in times of high retail inflation may not yield to the real growth. Discuss. Quite a good and technical question, I would say. I should not be praising these questions, I've said them myself, so my bad. Please take some time, but yes, I would not say it good, but yet I've designed it to be a bit more analytical than others. Please take 30-40 seconds and analyze this question. Do some mental exercise, think about what are the broader points, and then definitely I will cover it. Okay, let us start with the question, please. A virtuous cycle can happen only. First of all, what is virtuous cycle? We need to discuss. With the government leading the way means government must have to do something with the virtuous cycle. So when we are explaining virtuous cycle, obviously we need to talk about the role of government there. The idea of public investment-led growth strategy in the times of high retail inflation may not yield to real growth. So first of all, what is this public investment-led growth strategy? What is that strategy? And there is high retail inflation. Is it going to lead to real growth or not? That is something we need to discuss. So in the introduction part, as I've said, we need to talk about what is virtuous cycle. Again, not such a, unique term. It is used in parlance of economics, but it is not among the regularly discussed term. So you should start with the discussion on virtuous cycle. What is the virtuous cycle? Okay, and then how government can contribute towards creation of a virtuous cycle. Yes. So very briefly, I will talk about the virtuous cycle. Although you are expected to know this, is not that much tough. What is a virtuous cycle and a vicious cycle? Again, a term that I have discussed in the common terms earlier. Nonetheless, there is something called as vicious cycle. Vicious cycle is a situation where someone is trapped and it is very difficult to come out of that trap unless you prepare a proper strategy to come out of it. So vicious cycle is a trap. For example, you are poor. Let us say, we assume you are poor, and because of your poverty, you are not able to provide good education to your children, you are unable to provide good nutrition to them, good conditions to them, and as a result in future, they also do not get a good paying job, and they also spend their life in poverty, and again they will have the same problem as when they have children. So this is a vicious cycle. Okay. And against that, what is a virtuous cycle? Virtuous cycle is a situation where you do not have to do something very special. You definitely have to do your hard work, but you do not have to do something very special. You are automatically going up and up, where your situation is constantly improving and everything is improving you with that. Okay, so that is a situation of virtuous cycle, in which you are in a cycle that is lifting you up. Okay. Example of virtuous cycle, let us say economy is having a very good growth. Because economy is having very good growth, people have more income. Because of more income, people then, let me make a flow chart and explain very briefly. Let us say you have high growth. Because of high growth, people have high income. Because people are earning more, they consume more, high consumption. High consumption. And because people are consuming more, overall demand in the economy will increase. Demand rise. Okay, and because of increase in demand, the businesses expect more. The businesses expect more turnover, more business in future. Okay, the companies, the firms, they expect more business in future because demand is increasing. As a result, they open more factories. As a result, they invest in order to cater to more demand. So this automatically increases more investment. Okay, investment rise. And if investments are going to increase, this will create even higher growth. Now this is a virtuous cycle. Okay. Now, do we really need government necessarily for the virtuous cycle? The answer is no. We do not necessarily need a government. The answer is very clear. Okay, how do you answer that? First of all, you explain what is virtuous cycle. You can also make a flow chart like this. If you make it, it is better. I generally do not suggest making too many flow charts, graphs, etc. But here you can make. Virtuous cycle is best explained through a flow chart. You make this and then you talk about that although government involvement is not necessary and development can come in spite of the government, despite the government, but if government can play a role, then virtuous cycles can be more regular, can be more strong, and obviously it will help. So government can play a very big role, although it's not necessary. So first of all, we have countered this statement in a mild way that government is not necessary but important. government's involvement is not necessary but very important. Then what is this? The idea of public investment led growth strategy. Okay. So the idea is when economy is having a downturn, when there is low growth, then opposite of this can happen. Because of low growth, incomes are falling or incomes are stagnant. Consumption is stagnant, consumption not increasing. Because consumption not increases, businesses will also not invest. क्योंकि बिजनेस का क्या मोटिवेशन है इन्वेस्ट करने का? बिजनेस क्यों इन्वेस्ट करेगा? इन्वेस्ट हम करते हैं क्योंकि हमें नई फैक्ट्री खोलनी है, अपने प्रोडक्शन को बढ़ाना है. मैं प्रोडक्शन तब बढ़ाऊंगा जब डिमांड मुझे लगता है कि बढ़ रही है. सिर्फ इसलिए नहीं कि बैंक मुझे सस्ता लोन दे रहा है तो चलो एक और फैक्ट्री खोल लेते हैं, ऐसा नहीं करते हैं. हाँ, ऐसा जरूर होता है कि मैं पिछले 2-3 साल से सोच रहा हूँ डिमांड बढ़ रही है, मुझे उसको आगे लेके जाना है, अपना प्रोडक्शन बढ़ाना है, बट इंटरेस्ट रेट ज़्यादा है और इंटरेस्ट रेट कम होगा तो ये हो सकता है मैं जो शायद 2 साल और वेट करता, मैं आज ही लोन लेके फैक्ट्री लगा लूँ. तो लो इंटरेस्ट रेट हेल्प कर सकते हैं इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ाने में, बट असली इन्वेस्टमेंट का जो डिसीजन है वो तो डिमांड पे डिपेंड करता है. सो लो डिमांड और स्टेगनेंट डिमांड विल अफेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट. इन्वेस्टमेंट विल नॉट इंक्रीज, एंड इफ इन्वेस्टमेंट्स आर नॉट गोइंग टू इंक्रीज और इन्वेस्टमेंट्स फॉल डाउन, this growth is not going to increase. So you remain in low growth. That is also a vicious cycle. So sometimes a slowdown, a recession can push you into vicious cycle, and then government role become very important or in fact necessary to lift you out. Okay, and in those situations the idea of public investment led growth strategy is very important. That public investment means government expenditure, that government will invest because private sector has taken the back seat. This investment must rise for growth. If private sector will not do it, government will do it. Investment must come from somewhere, private or government. So government will do. If there is good growth, then businesses will automatically do, private sector will do. But if there is lack of growth, then government can also contribute. And if private sector role is not that much visible, is not able to play that strong role, then government should play a bigger role. That is what sometimes we argue in the Keynesian economics. So this public investment led growth strategy is the core principle of the Keynesian economics. What is Keynesian economics? There was a very popular economist, John Maynard Keynes, one of the key figure in economics. His place in economics is very, very high and comparable to Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Marshall, Schumpeter, people like these, the giants in the field of economics. So John Maynard Keynes' ideas were based upon how do we come out of recession, and public investment based or public spending based growth strategy was one of his core ideas. Nonetheless, let's move ahead with this question. Now, inflation and virtuous cycle relationship. Problem is when government invests more, then it will have to take more loans. From where government will get resources for investment? Government is going to borrow that money. Okay? पैसा छाप के करेंगे तो वो और भी बुरा है. Borrowing is better than printing money, so do not even think about printing money here. सो गवर्नमेंट को इन्वेस्ट करना है तो उसके लिए पैसा बोरोविंग से आएगा, और अगर गवर्नमेंट बहुत ज़्यादा लोन लेती है तो इकोनॉमिक थियोरी में हम जानते हैं इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ जाता है. वी नो दैट इन्फ्लेशन इंक्रीजेस व्हेन गवर्नमेंट इंक्रीजेस इट्स लोन्स. As a result, when government tries to adopt this strategy, there is always a big risk of inflation increase. And that is why there is limited application of this possibility. Otherwise, government would do it all the time. अगर ऐसा limitation नहीं होता तो हर सरकार हर समय ये करती ही रहती. So यही इसमें एक limitation है, यही इसमें एक अड़चन है. That government cannot continuously do it. Otherwise, there will be big inflation. So this risk is always there. Now we have talked about that risk. So in the answer next you are going to talk about what is the nature of inflation in India at present. So nature of inflation in India, you have to talk about the current inflation in India is related to the wholesale index, is not related to the CPI that much, WPI investment, and it is largely because of the supply chain issue. Okay. Again, a topic that I have discussed in detail in the state of the economy earlier. So please go and check out the previous videos you have not yet seen. And then we talk about if wholesale inflation happens, then some impact on the retail inflation also obviously happens. You cannot avoid that. Okay, and then you also talk about that inflation can be largely two types, demand driven or supply driven. The present inflation is supply driven, not demand driven. So if government is going to increase the demand in the economy by this method, then at least that type of inflation will not happen. Why inflation happens? When government invests. Because government distributes more money into economy. When government invests in infrastructure, it creates a lot of job for construction workers, for other type of industries, and that extra money goes into the economy, and people, these kind of people who are getting money from this investment, they are going to create a lot of demand. And because these kind of people are creating a lot of demand here, the inflation that happens is demand pull inflation. And at present, because I've already discussed our inflation is because of supply, the risk of government investment leading to inflation is relatively lower. That point you can talk about. Clear? So the present inflation in India is largely supply driven, very less demand driven, and as a result government can continue to invest, government can continue to adopt that strategy. And I've already discussed certain points in the previous question also, that there is excess liquidity in the system. So previous question was about government investment leading to interest rate increase. This question is about government investment leading to inflation increase. These are the two biggest challenges in our policies. अगर ये चैलेंज ना हो तो पॉलिसी मेकिंग में कुछ है ही नहीं, फिर तो एक 10th क्लास का बच्चा भी पॉलिसी बना सकता है। 10th क्लास का बच्चा भी सोचता है ना सपने में कि मेरे पास एक ऐसा बैट हो, मैं टच करूँ छक्का लगे, हर बॉल पे छक्का मारने का सपना देखते हैं जब हम छोटे होते हैं, लेकिन प्रैक्टिकल लाइफ में ये पॉसिबल नहीं है। तो उसी तरह इकोनॉमिक्स में भी ये पॉसिबल नहीं है कि आप हर बॉल पे छक्का लगाते रहें। छक्का लगाना कुछ हद तक गेंद पे डिपेंड करता है, कुछ हद तक बल्लेबाज की क्षमता पे डिपेंड करता है। तो अगर गेंद सही पिच पे है, सही स्लॉट में है, मेरी टाइमिंग ठीक है, मैं पिच पे सेट हूँ, पिच कुछ ज़्यादा नहीं कर रही है, तो ऑब्वियसली छक्का लगने के चांस ज़्यादा है। सो इकोनॉमी में भी वही है, अगर कंडीशंस अच्छी हैं, अगर मैं एक स्ट्रॉन्ग प्लेयर हूँ, मेरी इकोनॉमी की स्ट्रेंथ, मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रेंथ अच्छी है, तो छक्का लगने के चांस मतलब ग्रोथ होने के चांस ज़्यादा है। लेकिन हमें पहले रिस्क को भी समझना होगा। तो पॉलिसी मेकिंग के यही रिस्क हैं जो मैंने पिछले 2 क्वेश्चन में डिस्कस किया। इंटरेस्ट रेट बढ़ जाएगा इन्वेस्टमेंट करेंगे तो, दूसरा है इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ जाएगी। अगर ये दोनों ना बढ़े तो फिर कुछ चैलेंज ही नहीं है, फिर तो इन्वेस्ट करते रहे हम। तो ये चैलेंजेस अगर हमें समझ में आ गए तो आधी इकोनॉमिक्स वहीं समझ में आ जाती है। एनीवेज, let's move ahead. So with this you can cover this question that at present this risk is much less, and then you comment on the nature of government investment and its impact on the economy. That recovery that we had after COVID, the sharp V-shaped recovery we are talking about, government has played a very, very important role in that. Government consumption has increased a lot. Meanwhile, government has pushed itself so much that the loss because of private demand has been tapered off, has been reduced. So that is something you need to talk about. Again, if you want to understand it, please watch State of the Economy. Okay, the session that we have taken earlier. Economic survey, State of the Economy. Okay, and then you can definitely comment, will it create inflation or growth? At present, because there is excess liquidity, because we have supply side inflation, the continuation of public investment will not create too much inflation, or is not likely to, do not give very strong statement, is not likely to create too much of inflation. So that is how you will cover. Thank you. Okay. इन 2 क्वेश्चंस में मैंने थोड़ा ज़्यादा टाइम लगाया है, आने वाले क्वेश्चंस को हम थोड़ा सा कम समय देंगे, वो थोड़े स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड है। मैं ये जो पॉलिसी रिलेटेड क्वेश्चन है इनको थोड़ा डिटेल में करना चाह रहा था। आज की क्लास में मैंने थोड़ा हिंदी में भी बात की है, एंड आई बिलीव students should not have problem with that, because whatever I have discussed in Hindi, that is just repetition of what I have said in English, or it is just simplification of what I have said in English. So do not worry, nobody is missing out on anything here. I'm just trying to make it bit more bilingual. Okay, our classes are particularly English, but in these videos where we are approaching larger audience, then we do get lot of requests from lot of students that if we can be bit more bilingual, if we can be bit more simple in our approach. So I'm just trying to be that much simple in such technical questions, not everywhere. Let us look at the next question. This is a straight question from agriculture and not really much of technical aspects here. Okay, so you take some time here to understand the question, and then I will cover it. Please take 30-40 seconds and you do some mental exercise. Okay, what is open market sale scheme? Okay, so this is a scheme, definitely we're going to talk about it, of FCI. We'll also talk about FCI, the Food Corporation of India. How can it help NGOs and civil societies engaged in relief or running community kitchens for vulnerable section in the time of pandemic? So first of all, in general, we talk about the open market sale scheme and FCI. Then we talk about some amendment we have made in the open market sale scheme to help these. So actually the answer is one-liner. Frankly, there is not much of an answer to the second part of it. So we'll spend much more time in the first part itself. What is open market sale scheme? What is FCI? And then the second part very briefly. Relatively a shorter question in fact. So let us start the discussion. Why FCI auctions grain? So must understand that FCI plays a very important role in the agricultural markets. FCI does purchase at the MSP, minimum support price, and by doing so it supports the farmer as well. So FCI not only support the poor families by supplying grain under targeted public distribution scheme, TPDS, but it also supports farmers by purchasing grains from that. That is why many times FCI makes excess purchase, much more grain than it actually need for our food security programs, and then that extra grain it has to auction off. So you talk about that, the first, that FCI has to regularly auction the grain because it demands more, it purchases much more than its requirement. And why does it purchase more? To support our farmers, to create more purchase in the market at the MSP. Then you talk about what is OMSS, basically open market sale scheme, domestic. So these auctions are of two types. One is external auctions, exports that we create, and then secondly is the domestic sale auctions. So earlier, definitely the states could participate, some organizations definitely could participate, and they had to purchase a minimum commitment. अदरवाइज ऐसा ना हो ना कि लोग आ जाएं वहाँ कि 10 किलो चावल मैं भी लूँगा, मैं भी ऑक्शन में बैठता हूँ, या 10 बोरी चावल मैं ले लूँगा, ऐसा नहीं होता है. एक मिनिमम, एक लार्ज क्वांटिटी में परचेज करनी पड़ती है. सो limited number of parties could attend these auctions, could bid in these kind of auctions. So in the domestic, first of all, government provides a lot of food grain to the states to meet the targets under the food security program. Okay, to meet the targets for midday meal, to meet the targets for food for work and other programs. Now this is done at an issue price, which is very less, which is very, very cheap. But apart from that, if states needs more food to be distributed for their extra activities. For example, a state is running Amma Kitchen, a state is running Abba Kitchen. Sorry, I'm not trying to make fun of anyone, but just let's say some kind of schemes that different states are running. Then for the schemes like TPDS, for the schemes like Antodaya Ann Yojana, for the schemes like midday meal, they get the grains at issue price, which is much lesser. But if they need extra, they can get through these auctions. Okay, so this is the role of these auctions. And then the FCI also has to offload the extra grains, so private players are also there. And then you briefly talk about the issue price sale, the TPDS supply and the OMSS. I've already covered it. So your introduction goes into that direction. And almost 50% of your answer would be this much, because not too much content is there to cover. And then you talk about the next part, that FCI on the instruction of the government sell excess stock. This is basically the answer to this, what is OMSS. Okay, so this is basically your OMSS. And then we talk about this question. So under the OMSS 2020-21 policy, the policy that we created after the COVID situation, when a lot of migrant labor was returning homes and they required support from government. Government found out that government is unable to run lakhs of community kitchen required for support. And government in fact found a lot of NGOs, a lot of people have come up to help. Lot of temples, Gurdwara, etc. have also come to help. So government found out that it is better to assist these organizations rather than government running millions of or lakhs of community kitchens. Government did run some of the food providing subsidy programs, but they were limited. So government created a special dispensation of supply of food grain to all the NGOs engaged in the relief or running community kitchens for the migrant laborers. So we created a special provision for NGO and civil society to support the migrant labor. Now, in the conclusion part, in the next part, you talk about that why there was a need for doing so. The need was there because although government was in a position and in fact was supplying food grains to them, TDPS was available, but people when they are on the move, they are unable to prepare the food. This is the problem. And since people were unable to prepare food, they required ready to eat food, and which government could not provide. So government could provide them the PDS, public distribution system, grains. Government gave them extra things. For example, in Uttar Pradesh, the cooking oil was provided, some pulses were provided, spices were also provided. Okay, so it is said. And because of that, government in fact also gave a lot of money to these people in their accounts. But still it could not arrange for ready to eat food. So that is where private sector played a big role. And government did a good thing by providing food grain to them at a cheaper price by allowing them to participate in these auctions or to basically purchase at the reserve prices. So that is all that we have to cover in this question. Let us look at the next question now, please. Straightforward question. Informal workers in rural India have been hit most due to pandemic. Everyone know about it. In this context, elaborate on the steps taken by government for the rural economy. In fact, this question I should be leaving for you. You prepare the answer for this question. There is nothing absolutely confusing in this question. Absolutely straightforward question, one-liner question, and it requires a straight answer. There is no specific technique, art, prioritization. कुछ भी ऐसा नहीं है जो अलग से करना है. सीधा सीधा सवाल है, जो पूछा है उसका जवाब देना है. Informal workers in rural India have been hit most due to pandemic. So this is a statement. You talk about this statement, whether you support, do you agree? Although it is not asked, but whenever a statement is given in the question, either you assume that it is true and on that basis you answer, or you have some problem with this statement and then you counter. Here we do not have counter to that. This is correct. So you explain it very briefly, that why or why, sorry, not, I've just said the same thing. Why do you think rural informal workers in rural India have been hit most due to pandemic? So, in this question, when you start, let me give you some instructions here. First of all, please explain who is an informal worker as per the definition. How do we define an informal worker? A hint is here, and as I've told you earlier that you can download the slides, so please look at them and download the slides as well. So informal workers are those who work in informal sector, and basically we define all those people who are outside any kind of pension program or any kind of provident fund provision, medical leave, any kind of medical insurance or other insurance. So if you do not get any of these benefit, you do not have any kind of registration for the national pension scheme, the provident fund, which is necessary even for private sector also. So if you do not get coverage under that, then you are in informal sector. You do not have medical leaves, you do not have some basic provision of leaves and security. Okay, you do not have any kind of severance pay or package provision. You do not have any kind of gratuity provision. Then more likely you are in informal sector. The most important criteria is whether you are registered in the provident fund or not. Okay, so whether you have social security benefits which are provided by the employer and the government, whether you are registered for them or not, and whether you get medical leaves and other type of leaves or not. So you define that, you talk about who is that, and then you talk about why there is disproportionate effect on the informal worker. Pandemic का effect सब पे पड़ा है, but हमने कहा है कि ये सबसे ज़्यादा affect हुए हैं, that they have been hit most. So you explain why? Because they have lack of social security. This is one of the big reasons. Secondly, because most of the time government do not have exact record of these people. Government is also unable to intervene properly. These workforce is also less educated, less privileged, and as a result they are unable to get support like the laborers or workers in other type of industry through their work unions, through other type of provision. That probability is also less for them. And this kind of workforce is also most likely have a technical gap, has a mobility gap, has different kind of gaps and disabilities, not physical disabilities, but disability in the sense of the financial understanding, disability in the sense of technical understanding, etc. So most of the time they do not have savings, enough savings with them, because their financial learning or their financial wisdom is relatively poor. I'm not saying all the poor people or all the people in informal sector are like that, but this happens to some people in that. So that is a issue. And then secondly, the nature of the work that they perform that cannot be performed on computers online, that is also an issue. Okay, so that you talk about that why there is disproportionate, unpe ज़्यादा impact क्यों पड़ा. Then you provide some detail of the economic loss on the informal sector. Then you talk about the sector in general. कि इन workers की बात नहीं है, पूरे informal sector पे ही impact है. Not just on workers, even the managers, even the owners of this business, they are also very badly hit. Why? Because again, as I've said, there is a lack of online work options, so they could not continue their work. They had to completely stop the work. Then they have lack of support from government schemes such as loan moratorium. लोन मोरेटोरियम उसी को तो मिलेगा ना जो बैंक या फॉर्मल सिस्टम से लेगा. अगर किसी ने प्राइवेट मनी लेंडर से पैसा मिला उनको थोड़ी मोरेटोरियम मिला. मोरेटोरियम तो उनके लिए था जो बैंकिंग सिस्टम या एक फॉर्मल फाइनेंशियल सिस्टम में थे. सो गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत सारी स्कीम भी निकाली, सपोर्ट भी दिया, बट उसी को मिलेगा जो फॉर्मल सिस्टम में होगा. सो पीपल कुड नॉट गेट सपोर्ट even though there were provisions. So that you need to talk about. And then lastly, the steps taken by the government. So a very important step, the government is now preparing the e-Shram portal, where we are going to create a database on the unorganized worker, because we are saying that government do not have data on them. Government was unable to reach out to them. So ऐसा ना हो भविष्य में, इसके लिए हम e-Shram portal बना रहे हैं. Then there were almost 2 crore migrant workers. So these people were provided almost 50,000 crore rupees Okay, so almost 5,000 crore rupees directly in their bank accounts. Then Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana also catered to them, and that had budget of 1.7 lakh crore. And then almost 50,000 crore rupees were spent to give them employment in their home districts. So we identified 116 districts from where there are maximum migrant labor, जहाँ से लोग काम करने बाहर जाते हैं. इस तरह के 116 डिस्ट्रिक्ट, जो कि अनफॉर्चुनेटली एक टर्म है, बीमारू स्टेट्स. आई डू नॉट लव दिस टर्म, आई डू नॉट लाइक दिस टर्म, इट इज़ ए डेरोगेटरी टर्म, बट स्टिल unfortunately even today it is true. When you look at the migration pattern, it is from these states in large numbers. So Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh. Nonetheless, so in 116 such districts, government has created a fund of 50,000 crore rupees to provide additional employment to people there, so that when they go back to their village, they get support. So schemes तो बहुत सारी, लेकिन एग्जाम में अगर 4 भी लिख दे तो बहुत है. Okay, these are the 4 major schemes or 4 major initiatives. You can write some of the other schemes as well, not necessary you have to follow exactly these 4 points. So that freedom obviously you have. Here we have lot of initiatives. So now let us look at the next question, please. Question number 11. National infrastructure pipeline will catalyze an all-round development of Indian economy. Evaluate the above statement. Again, very straightforward, direct question. Generally the questions which are asked from specific sectors, these are straightforward and direct. Policy making questions we have already covered in large numbers in the previous questions. So what is a national infrastructure pipeline? We start with that, and why do we expect that it will create all-round development? So just straightforward. We do not even have to give you 30-40 seconds to analyze. There is nothing to analyze. It's so straightforward. So what is the? So first of all, you talk about the importance of infrastructure. So straightforward that even I do not have to talk much about it. You talk about that infrastructure is very, very important because it provides support to the businesses, to the government, to the households. And it is critical to cut down the cost for all kind of businesses, because transportation is plays a very big role in every aspect of life. Transportation has big role and a big weight in the retail inflation as well. So if transportation costs come down, transportation become faster, obviously it is of great help. So infrastructure is very important to cut down costs, to improve efficiency, to improve speed. It is critical for our international trade also. So this is definitely one of the most important role that government should play. Then you talk about what is national infrastructure pipeline. So what is this pipeline first of all? So you talk about that the kind of funds we require for infrastructure are huge, and unfortunately government alone cannot do this. Private sector must be roped in. So a lot of projects are there which are PPP and that have been launched in the past, and in future also private sector will have to play a very big role in the development of infrastructure in the country. So the target is to provide obviously the world-class infrastructure to the country, but we are going to finance PPP projects under this through the viability gap funding. So कई बार ऐसा होता है कि किसी प्राइवेट प्लेयर ने एक प्रोजेक्ट पिक किया अंडर PPP, प्राइवेट प्लेयर एंड गवर्नमेंट स्टार्टेड ए प्रोजेक्ट एंड प्राइवेट प्लेयर इज डूइंग ओके, प्राइवेट प्लेयर इज डूइंग रीजनेबली वेल and is also working fast as per the time schedule. But what happens in between, that cost of production goes up significantly. Let us say cement price double in between, steel price increase by 50% and other cost increase. So अब private sector तो tender ले चुका है, private sector has already taken the tender and it has agreed to a cost structure. Meanwhile, if cost increases that much, there will be problem for private sector. And इस तरह के projects बहुत सारे अभी देश में बंद पड़े हैं, क्योंकि प्रोजेक्ट को जब शुरू किया तो कोस्ट कुछ और था, प्रोजेक्ट जैसे काम करने लगा, चलने लगा उस पर काम, तो कोस्ट बढ़ गया, काफ़ी ज़्यादा बढ़ गया और लॉस इतने होने लगे कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर ने उस प्रोजेक्ट को बीच में ही रोका हुआ है. ये वो बहुत ही स्लो चल रहा है. सो ये सब बहुत ही कॉमन है और ये होता है, इसमें हम किसी को एग्जैक्टली ब्लेम नहीं कर सकते. वी कैनॉट एग्जैक्टली ब्लेम प्राइवेट सेक्टर इन ऑल द केसेस. In some cases, yes, they do have a role. They do, I mean, do some kind of manipulation, etc. But there are many cases where even the well-to-do, even the very professional companies like L&T are also in trouble. Okay. So now here, government will play a more active role in order to complete the infrastructure projects and also to launch more infrastructure projects in future. So the idea is to improve project preparation, attract investment, which can be domestic as well as foreign, and that is the idea. Then you talk about infrastructure financing in India, gaps in the fundings, that we need almost $200 billion of investment, sorry, $400 billion of investment, whereas we are spending at present less than $200 billion, and this is definitely much less than the adequate amount. And if we spend $400 billion for 5 years, then we will spend $2 trillion on our infrastructure. This is our requirement, that for 5 years continuously we spend $400 billion, and then 2 trillion infrastructure we create. That will give us push to our economy. Then only we can really look at ourselves as a $5 trillion economy, or an economy which is now ready for $10 trillion target. Then we can do so, but not right now. So that infrastructure financing in India has a lot of gap. So private sector has to cover a lot of ground. So you talk about that, you discuss that in detail, and then you talk about the benefits of national infrastructure pipeline. Some additional details are also here, that for example, the role of center here is almost 40%, state almost 40%, private sector almost 20%. Okay, and then 25 lakh crore rupees. The total budget is around 111 crore rupees. So out of that, 25 lakh crore rupees is towards energy. Energy is very, very important for economy to grow. So energy is our highest outlay. Then roads, almost 20 lakh crore. So you have this breakup, you have these slides to download. Please look at that in more detail. So that is something you need to cover in the national infrastructure pipeline. Straightforward question, straightforward answer, nothing anything, I mean nothing which is very complicated or tough. And this is our last question for the day, and we do not have any extra discussion here. This question is for you. Why is India witnessing a startup revolution, and why there is a sudden increase in the number of unicorn companies? What is the implication of rise of these on economy? Relatively an easy question, frankly. I will give you some ideas here. I do not have any pointers here. I wanted you to answer it. Comments में इसका आंसर लिखिए, हम वहाँ पे इसको आपको reply करेंगे. This is where I want you to write an answer. I give you very small direction, small hint here. Why do we witness startup revolution? Startup का revolution कब होता है? Startup का revolution तब होता है जब, when there is startup revolution is there when an economy has created a system where private sector itself is financing new people. When the traditional financial system is no longer required to intervene, when the people who are already rich, people who have made money in their business, instead of they controlling every business and they starting and expanding their companies into every direction, they start taking ownership into new businesses by new people, and by doing so they support new businesses. Basically I'm talking about the increasing role of venture capital in India. How the CEOs and entrepreneurs of old businesses, they are financing new businesses, how they are getting involved in the new businesses more and more. अगर मुझे एक कंपनी स्टार्ट करनी है तो मेरे पास क्या क्या ऑप्शन है? इफ आई हैव टू स्टार्ट ए कंपनी, व्हाट काइंड ऑफ ऑप्शंस डू आई हैव? आई हैव ए ऑप्शन दैट आई कैन आइदर रेज इक्विटी, मैं दूसरे लोगों को अपनी कंपनी में हिस्सेदार बना लेता हूँ, मैं अपनी कंपनी के शेयर बेच देता हूँ, दैट इज़ इक्विटी. और आई विल रेज डेट, मैं अपनी कंपनी का आई मीन आई टेक ए लोन फॉर माई कंपनी, सो दैट इज़ इक्विटी और डेट. लोन लेना है तो उसके भी 2-3 रूट हैं. I will take a loan from the formal financial system. I take a loan from the private money lender or I take a loan through issuing bonds. प्रॉब्लम ये है स्टार्टअप के लिए दोनों ऑप्शन नहीं है. बैंक भी नए बिजनेस को, रिस्की बिजनेस को लोन नहीं देते. Banks do not give loan easily to these startups. And then secondly, it's not just about banks. Even private money lenders also not easily provide money, but that is where venture capitalists have come in. They also provide debt. Whereas traditionally this option was not available. Corporate bond you cannot even issue as a startup. You need to have a good track record, then only SEBI will give you permission to issue corporate bond. So that option is also not accessible. So if you look at debt, not many options are there, frankly. And talking about equity, again, same thing, SEBI will not allow, I think there is some mosquito, okay, I think, sorry. Yes, SEBI will not allow you to register in the capital market. SEBI will not allow you to issue stocks unless you have a proven track record and you have something here. I'm sorry, give me 1 second here. There is something, maybe a kind of something walking on my ear. My bad, sorry. Some kind of worm or something was there around my neck or my ear. Anyways, let us finish it. Yes. So, we were talking about the startup revolution in India, and as I've said कि एक ट्रेडिशनल कंपनी को तो सब तरह का ऑप्शन है. उसको बैंक भी लोन दे देता है, वो बॉन्ड भी इशू कर देती है, वो स्टॉक मार्केट में शेयर भी निकाल देती है. लेकिन एक स्टार्टअप के पास ये सब ऑप्शन नहीं होते थे. सो स्टार्टअप को पैसा कैसे मिलेगा जब तक ये वेंचर कैपिटल, एंजल इन्वेस्टर्स ये सब नहीं आएंगे. नाउ बिकॉज दे हैव एंटर्ड द मार्केट्स इन ए लार्ज वे, द market of India has opened up, the market of India has matured, the venture capital has matured, and India is a country where lot of people are coming back after working abroad, getting exposure abroad, and India has a large diaspora. So that is also helping India. NRIs have also played a big role here, and not just that, India has also cultivated a culture in the last 10 years where startup is getting promoted more and more. So in such a situation, in such a broader environment, we have seen a startup revolution. Okay, a sudden rise, ये sudden नहीं है. गवर्नमेंट पिछले 6 साल से स्टार्टअप इंडिया, स्टैंड अप इंडिया इन पे काम कर रही है. नए एंटरप्रेन्योर्स को हम लोग प्रमोट कर रहे हैं, उनके लिए स्कीम्स हैं, 3 साल तक उनको टैक्स नहीं देना है, बहुत सारे हमने ऑप्शंस क्रिएट किए हैं. सो ऑब्वियसली गवर्नमेंट हैज़ ऑल्सो प्लेड ए रोल हेयर, ए बिग रोल. यू कैन नॉट इग्नोर दैट. बट द बिगेस्ट रोल हेयर इज प्लेड बाय द existing entrepreneurs who have become venture capital providers now. For example, Narayan Murthy, Ratan Tata, these people have also invested in large number of businesses, and because of their help, which is obviously not a philanthropic help, but still it is a big help, that they took a risk with new persons. So because of their help, now large number of companies are rising in India, and a new breed of very young billionaires is emerging in India. So that is very good for us. And implication of rise is improvement in innovation. स्टार्टअप आएंगे तो नए नए आइडियाज़ आएंगे, स्टार्टअप आएंगे तो इकोनॉमी एक नई दिशा में जाएगी. Innovation is the biggest benefit. Investment obviously, but innovation. And then it will create more competition. Competition is very important here. Innovation, competition, efficiency. So these are the 3 points that you should largely focus on apart from the traditional points. Traditional points तो है ही, कंपनियाँ बड़ी हो रही हैं, so obviously growth बढ़ेगी, investment बढ़ेगा, वो these are traditional points. But these 3 also you need to talk about. So please do write some of your answers here and we will look into them. Thank you. We have completed the discussion and we have completed this entire series on the budget and survey. I will cover more topics. I will cover additional reports, additional things in. So you will continue to get my videos. Do not believe that our interaction has ended here. Okay, so thank you.